Hi there, it's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator, and today I'm going to share with you my favourite books of all time. These are the ones that have really left a big, massive impact on me. Ones that have influenced me, ones that have really introduced me to a whole other line of work, whether they be just simple, great stories or works of absolute difficulty that force you to become a better reader. I got the whole works here, and some of them have come from this year actually, which has been quite good because mostly the last 3 years I haven't been able to read anything that I've actually quite loved. So without ado, let's get into it. I'm going to share with you my top 10 books and also 5 honourable mentions, one of which is a short story collection, which is Flannery O'Connor's Complete Stories. It has taken me so long to get around to reading her, but I finally did it this year, towards the end of last year, and this year I read her short stories. A Good Man Is Hard to Find, Everything That Rises Must Converge, Enoch on the Gorilla, a few others. And then I also read her novel, Wise Blood, which I actually really liked as well. Good book. But as fine as a book as Wise Blood is, I still don't think it compares to her short stories. I mean, she's quite possibly the greatest short story writer that I've ever come across. I've yet to find anything that compares to it. I mean, they're fantastic. Honestly, read A Good Man Is Hard to Find. It is a truly brilliant 5-star read. You won't regret it. So that's Flannery O'Connor's short story collection. All of the short stories in this one volume here that I picked up. Really glad that I found this. Damn good read. The next one is a work of classic fiction, and that is For Whom the Bell Tolls. Damn fine piece of work. Now, this was a bit of a hesitant pick for me because of the four big books that he released, which is A Farewell to Arms, The Sun Also Rises, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and The Old Man in the Sea. The one that I actually resonated with the most was A Farewell to Arms, which a couple of years ago I would have actually had in my top 10. I really, really loved it, particularly the middle section where they're going through war-torn France, I think it is, or Italy, I can't remember. I think it might be Italy. But on a reread of The Old Man in the Sea, I found that initially I loved it and now I only just liked it. And so I figured, well, maybe my taste in literature has changed. Maybe I just don't adhere to Hemingway's writing style anymore. But I keep thinking back to For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is the biggest of his books. I think maybe Islands in the Stream might come close to matching it in length. The story of Robert Jordan, who's this young American volunteer who's sent to Spain during the Spanish Civil War and is sent to go with dynamite to go blow up a bridge. I mean, it only takes place over a few days, I think 2 or 3 days max. But that final section where they're on a mission to blow up the bridge, I think is absolutely brilliant. And the ending of the book in particular is one that will stay with me. I always think about it. I mean, Hemingway has a good way of writing endings. I really like the way he ends books. But this is the one that sticks with me the most out of all of them. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm hesitant to return to it because maybe I might have the same reaction I did to The Old Man in the Sea, where I like it, but I don't love it as much as the first time I read it. And that might be because Hemingway was my initial reintroduction into reading. So I'm curious to see how it goes. I'm tempted to really go back and read this one, but as it stands, it's an honourable mention, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Okay, this one also used to be in my top 10 and got kicked out as well, but I had to include it, at least one Nabokov novel. This was the first Nabokov I ever read, Invitation to a Beheading. A wondrous, almost hallucinatory thing of a man by the name of Cincinnatus C, he's basically condemned to death. I mean, in the first page alone, you find out that he's been sentenced to death. You never find out why. And he spends his remaining days in this almost like, it's a jail, but it's almost like a castle. And it's got labyrinthine hallways, and you're never quite sure of the map of this jail. And he's got this weird person that's next door to him in the jail as well. And he's got the weird warden, and there's a little girl who apparently was a prelude to Lolita, which is a book he wrote many years after Invitation to Beheading. Invitation to Beheading is one of his earlier novels. But there's just so much going on in this book that, I mean, I think I must have only got a surface level reading of this thing and still loved it. So I'm curious to just go back and do a reread of a lot of the Nabokov books that I've read in the past and see if I pick up even more from it than I did the first time I read it, particularly books like Pinchon and Despair and Laughter in the Dark. But of the 4 that I have read, the one that keeps coming back to mind for me is Invitation to Beheading. A damn fine book. Honourable mention here. The second last honourable mention goes to David Foster Wallace's final book, unfinished book, The Pale King, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, but no Pulitzer Prize was given that year. In particular, for one section, I'm not quite sure how far into the book it is, but it's like this 120-ish page section where this guy walks into the wrong wrong seminar, wrong room, and it turns out to be about taxes. And it leads to this whole just crisis. He just becomes entranced by the whole idea of working at the IRS and all that sort of thing, and how it took over his mind. And at least that's how I remember it. It's been a long time since I read it. It's a very ambitious novel, a novel about boredom. So, I mean, I read this before I read Infinite Jest as sort of as an introduction to his fiction, apart from the short story collections that I read, like Girl with Curious Hair and Brief Interviews of Hideous Men, which I was almost going to include as well because I thought that was a damn fine book. But I still really stand by this book, that even though Infinite Jest is a better book than The Pale King, I think has better writing in it. So, I mean, there's also a section where it's got like three guys in this elevator and they're just having these interesting conversation. And it's like the elevator just doesn't stop. They're always in there for this long period of time just talking. There's wonderful sections in this book that are just absolutely brilliant. I really stand by this book as something of a masterclass in writing, even though it's technically not finished. But I still recommend it. So The Pale King, David Foster Wallace. And then the final one is Franny and Zoe, J.D. Salinger. I had to conclude a J.D. Salinger book. I've read quite a few of his work. I've read everything J.D. Salinger has ever written, apart from Catcher in the Rye, which is the big one. The book that every teenager has read in this English class. I still have not read it. I don't know if I ever will get around to reading it. But of all the ones that I've read, including High Beams, Carpenters, The 9 Stories, which A Good Day for Banana Fish is a damn fine short story, so I recommend that one. In fact, I probably should have mentioned it earlier as another book I'd recommend. But Franny and Zoe in particular resonates with me because it's about a brother and a sister. It's in two parts. First part's like a short story involving Franny before her breakdown. And the second part is like a novella. Takes place mostly in an apartment. And it ends with this beautiful phone call that takes place in the same apartment between Franny and Zoe. And it resonates with me a lot because I've got a sister. We had these sort of conversations when we were younger as well. So I thought it was quite beautiful. A beautiful book. I think it's his best work by far, at least from what I've read. So Franny and Zoe, J.D. Salinger. Okay, now we're on to the top 10 books that I would consider my favorites of all time. And we're going to start with a non-fiction book, actually. Joan Didion's The White Album, a collection of essays. She is the Queen of California. I have not read anything that comes close to describing California the way she does it. She has a wonderful writing style. Her technique is fabulous. She is brilliant. Damn fine writer. Absolutely. I would recommend it to anyone. I've read plenty of books by her, and she's yet to let me down. The most recent book I've read by her is Blue Nights, which details her daughter, Quintana, and in particular the effect of her death on Joan, which is a very sad book, but I don't think it measures up to this one here. As a work of non-fiction, I've yet to come across anything else or have read anything else in the past that even comes close to matching this. And I include things like essays by David Foster Wallace and even David Sedaris. There's plenty of people out there whose non-fiction is good, but she's the OG. She's the best. Stories about hanging out with the Manson girls, buying dresses with them. Stories about hanging out with the Doors and waiting for Jim Morrison to finally show up. I mean, it's endless. It's just a collection of images and vignettes of her time living in this wonderful state full of all these cultural references and all this historical stuff that's going on. If you want to get a feel of California at that time, read the White Album. Highly recommended. So that's number 10. The next one is J.G. Ballard's High Rise. Damn good piece of prescient sci-fi dystopian, whatever you want to call it. But it's a really fucked up piece of work about this 40-story tower block in, I think it's London, that descends into an orgy of degradation over just a short period of time. I mean, civilization within this tower just collapses and all hell breaks loose. And, it goes from even the bottom levels where all the low-income earners are all the way to the top where all the high earners are. No one is safe. It's just all these parties and all this violence. I mean, it opens with the main character, I think, cooking a dog, roasting a dog over a spit and eating its leg. So it gives you an idea of what that's like. I've read like Crash and Concrete Island and Atrocity Exhibition, and they're damn fine pieces of works as well, but they don't compare to this. This here is a great novel. And I also like the film adaptation as well, the one with Tom Hiddleston. I quite enjoyed that movie, even though it still didn't reach the peak of what the best parts of this book do. So High Rise, number 9. Number 8 is this cult classic book here, Geek Love by Catherine Dunn, a story of carnies from the, I think, 80s or something like that, and they're mutated in all sorts of ways. I mean, the father and the mother try all sorts of ways to just absolutely just mutate their kids into all these various things, whether it's albino dwarf for Hunchback, or I think the merman, I can't remember, but the son's like this fish boy, basically. You know, the bottom half is all fish. Or the baby who has telekinetic powers, or the Siamese twins. I mean, there's a lot of really screwed up stuff that goes on in this book. Now, I'm a bit reluctant to mention all the stuff takes place in the present day, because I'd say about 20% takes place in the modern day, and the story is being retold about the past, about when she was a child. But what happens in that 75 to 80% that takes place in the past during their traveling carny business with this family is the best thing that I've read in 2022, hands down. Nothing comes close to matching it. Right now, Geek Love is the best book I've read this year, and I just cannot say much more about it. There's plenty of people out there who absolutely love this book, and it's getting a lot of attention, and it deserves that attention. But bear in mind that there are sections in this book that will make you sick to your stomach in a certain way. It's not for the average reader. I mean, there's one short story about the dad who takes his kids on to Disneyland or something like that, and then he drops the kids back home, but he goes into the house with a shotgun. I think he kills the parents, and then he puts a gun to his face, but he stuffs it up, and he's like hobbling around, and half his face is missing, so he wears a bag over his head from now on. Stuff like that's going on in this, but the way it's described and the way the words in this book are articulated, it's very, very good. I haven't read anything else by Catherine Dunn, but she'll forever be remembered for Geek Love. And apparently Tim Burton wanted to turn this into a movie, which, I mean, the style's there, but I don't think he could pull off the ugliness of it. I just think he's too much of an endearing director to be able to do it. But nonetheless, I recommend Geek Love to anyone out there. Do check it out. It's a damn fine piece of work. The next one is another recent read. I read this last year. It is Luna Park. That's a picture of Bret Easton Ellis right there. Bret Easton Ellis, I'm a huge fan of. I've been very defensive about him. There are a lot of people out there who don't like him, but I do. Although I don't consider American Psycho to be in like the top 3 books of his. And a lot of people say American Psycho is a great piece of work. I mean, it's a fine piece of work. It's damn good. But I mean, I'd have it ranked as Luna Park, Less Than Zero, Rules of Attraction, and then American Psycho. In particular, like Rules of Attraction I liked but didn't love, but have come to appreciate it more over time just thinking back on it. I really, really, really like that book now, and includes a chapter with Patrick Bateman in it. Less Than Zero is a great debut novel. I mean, he published it when he was 21, so he was off to a high-flying start. Have not read Glamorama, but Luna Park, I did not expect to love it as much as I did. It is this meta work. It is the story. The first 40 pages detail Bret Easton Ellis's life up to the beginning of Luna Park, and there are little bits and pieces in it that are fictitious, but for the most part, it is true. And then Luna Park shows him sort of just devolving. He gets into this new marriage. There's a couple of kids involved. And he starts losing his mind, his sanity. He starts thinking that there's a serial killer after him who could possibly be Patrick Bateman. The Detective Kimball from American Psycho in his book actually shows up to interview him about the killings that are going on and the disappearances of children. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of just heavy plot points. It is a fantastic read. It's even a scary read. There are parts in this book where I was actually nail biting because I didn't know what was going to happen. So for that reason alone, I consider Luna Park to be Bret Easton Ellis's best book, but unfortunately I don't recommend it because in order to get a fuller appreciation of it, I think you have to read his prior work. So that would include obviously Less Than Zero, The Rules of Attraction, American Psycho, The Informers, and Glamorama, or at least read one or two of them before you read Luna Park. That way you get a better effect of what this book is really like and how he goes about describing his life leading up to this point. Start with Less Than Zero. I think that's a good place to start, but Luna Park is his best work in my opinion. Coming in at number 6, we have this wonderful folio edition here of The Confederacy of Dunces. Probably the funniest book I've ever read, maybe on par with Catch-22. I really, really like this book. Oh, check that out. I mean, it's got stuff like that in there. I mean, the folio edition is just absolutely beautiful. I picked this one up along with 2 other books from that site. So for anyone out there who's looking for a favorite book of theirs in a great edition, do check out the Folio Society. They are fantastic. But the story of an absolute arsehole of a character who gets into all sorts of shenanigans. My all-time favorite is when he goes to work at like this factory and he tries to start a revolution with the workers and it just fails miserably. It's hilarious stuff. He becomes a hot dog vendor, but he's not very good at it. He eats more hot dogs than he sells. There's shenanigans involving a bar, and just his interactions with his own mother are just on another level. A Confederacy of Dunces is, yeah, it's a very funny book, and I do intend on rereading it at some point in the future of my life. Very good, a great detail of New Orleans at that time too. I mean, you could map out New Orleans based on descriptions in this book. So yeah, Confederacy of Dunces, number 6. Number 5 is another Folio Society edition. This time it is Catch-22, Joseph Heller, probably the greatest war book ever written, which is also an anti-war book. Once again, stellar is illustrations. I consider this book a comedy for the first 2/3 of it, and then it just gets more and more darker. I mean, towards the end here, the book just gets extraordinarily dark with its themes, with how multiple characters die, and I mean, there's just a lot going on here. But the conversations themselves, particularly in the first third of it, which are just rapid fire. There's so many characters being introduced, you just get lost in it all. But then eventually it clicks, and you find a way to get into the rhythm of the book, and it becomes better and better and better as you go along. I sincerely mean that. If you haven't read Catch-22, do not be put off by the first 50 pages because of just how fast-paced and dense it can be. Stick with it because it will align with your reading pattern, and you will get better at it, and you will possibly like it, maybe even love it as much as I have. I really like Catch-22. It's a great work of fiction, a great work of classic fiction. It took him a long time to write it, but he finally got it published, and I'm glad he did, and I'm glad I read it. I have not read Something Happened, even though some people out there prefer it over Catch-22, but I'll get to it one day. Catch-22, number 5. Okay, I'm going to do a double here because it's the same author. Number 4 and number 3, Suttree and Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. These are his 2 best books. Not The Road, even though I do appreciate The Road for what it's going for. He won the Pulitzer Prize for The Road, but I do think that was long overdue. He should have won it for one of these 2 books here. In particular, maybe Blood Meridian, which is maybe one of the greatest books that I've read in the 20th century. It's possibly the greatest book written in the 20th century, even though it's not my favorite book that I've got here. Just an absolutely bleak look at the West and the Western expansion and the war with the Indians, and how this Glanton gang, this group led by these maniacal characters, just go on a war path and eventually just start scalping anyone not just out of necessity, but just for the thrill of it. It leads to this really cataclysmic ending, especially the ending involving the judge. So that's a bit of a spoiler here. So if you don't want to get the book spoiled for you, then skip ahead. But the ending where the kid has grown up into the man and he walks into the bar to find the judge just sitting there. In the meantime, there's like a bear dancing as well, and there's people playing the fiddle, and a girl just playing with the bear, and there's a meteor shower happening overhead. And he has this conversation with the judge after having not seen him for many years and seeing that the judge has not aged, that he's possibly this supernatural being who can speak multiple languages, who's 7 feet tall, who's hairless from head to toe, completely hairless in all aspects. And then what happens at the end involving the outhouse is just, I mean, it sticks with me. There are so many theories going on out there, and I've heard plenty of great theories that are not just surface level, but are deeper than that. Who knows what's going on in this book, but it is mystical, to say the least. As for Suttree, this is probably the closest you'll ever get to an autobiographical book by Cormac McCarthy. Takes place in Tennessee and involves a whole host of characters that you want to give a hug to because they're just a wonderful group of people. On the filthy Knoxville River, he's on a boat. He does fishing. He hangs out with just a whole host of degraded characters, outcasts. and he traverses through this with his dignity intact. Cornelius Suttry he just gets through anything, and he just works his way through everything, and has wonderful conversations with people, even though he doesn't get along with his family based on parts that I've reread. But it might just be Cormac's best novel, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. I really do stand by it. It's his longest work by far, but honestly, you can get through it easily enough. It's really good. Full of $1,000 words. There's plenty of words there where I had to go and look up in the dictionary because I had no idea what the hell they meant. But you will have a great time with Suttry, and you will have a hell of a time with Blood Meridian. Do read those 2 books there. As a starting point, you probably, if you've never read Cormac McCarthy before, then as a starting point, I recommend No Country for Old Men. Okay, number 2 is this thick, dense piece of brilliance. Gravity's Rainbow, Thomas Pinchon. I still consider it to be the best book he's ever written, although I've yet to read Mason and Dixon and Against the Day, his other 2 big books. But I don't know how they'll compare to this. This is just hallucinatory in every sense of the word. There's so many things going on in this book. I mean, the things that stand out to me, like Byron the Light Bulb, or the story of Pokler, you know, that little short story there, which ends with him walking through a concentration camp after it's been liberated, which is one of the few times you get a glimpse at that side of the war. Or all the things that are happening at the casino. And that's not even taking into account the bombs that drop where the main character, Tyrone Slothrop, has sex. The extinction of the Dodo. I mean, the list is endless. And the fact that this book runs on a loop, so it ends and where it begins. It's funny, it's deranged. There's a lot of stuff here that are highbrow, and there's a lot of stuff that are lowbrow. And I loved every minute of it. Not that I understood every minute of it. So I do plan on giving it a second read through, and hopefully finding out even more about this book. I do have the companion piece, so I plan on reading it back to back with that. But as it stands, this here, which I read 3 years ago during a spell when I had no job, read it in a couple of months during a very depressive time in my life, and I fell in love with it instantly. It was the best thing I read at the time, and to this day, it's still the best thing I have read since. So in the last 3 years, this has been my favorite book. I'm glad I read this book. I really am. Gravity's Rainbow, number 2. And number 1 is the biggest one of them all. This hardcover, Infinite Jest by Dale Foster Wallace. I have another one. I have a paperback that I'm still working my way through. I'm doing a reading project on it, and I'm about 200 pages into it, roughly. So I'm planning on doing some more stuff, more videos that detail the stuff that goes on in that book there. And on that read through, I found out so much more interesting things that I could not have fathomed the first time I read through it. So it just shows just how interconnected the stories are within Infinite Jest. It truly is, I think, in my mind, the greatest book I've ever read in my life. Whether or not people agree it's the best book, well, it's up to you. It's your opinion, man. But it's also my opinion as well. And my opinion is that this is the best thing that I've ever read. And it will stay that way. There's just all the characters, all the references, all the historical references, all the interconnected stories, everything involving the tennis academy, the drug house, and even the wheelchair assassins, which I do not love that much, but the Ennet house and the tennis academy more than make up for it in my mind. This to me is the best thing I've ever read. I stand by that. I really, really do. And I know there are plenty of people out there who will... Well, basically, it's Infinite Jest is one of those books where you you walk into a bookstore, mention the name, and half the people will drop their mouth and look at you with affection, and the other half will eye roll you. That's just the type of book Infinite Jest is. I'm one of the ones that will just drop their mouth and want to get into a conversation. And I'll get into a conversation with anyone that's read this book. I stand by it. I really love this book. I read it back in 2018. Took 3 months because I really took my time with it, and I'm taking my time with the reread now, but I'm glad I did. And that is it. Those are my top 10 favorite books of all time with 5 honorable mentions. Anything there you like, by all means, comment below and let me know what you think of it. Anything that you dislike, by all means, comment below, and I'll get back to you about it. That's all there is. Thanks very much for watching, and all the best. Catch you next time.